This is Mike McAdam from Gen X Guitar. Today we're going to be looking at the tone secrets of Edward Van Halen and his use of the Eventide micro pitch effect. Stick around. So in this series of videos, what I want to do is look at some of the finer points of Edward Van Halen's guitar sound. You know, a lot of times what happens is people say, okay, get a Super Strat, get a modded Marshall, and you're most of the way there. But I want to look at some of the other elements that contribute to his sound. So throughout Van Halen's career, he used various forms of the Eventide micro pitch. I believe the first one was the H949, which may have been used as early as the first album. It's certainly on the second album. So what I want to do is take you through some riffs and kind of the evolution of this sound and how Eddie used it. I would say by the 90s, this was a huge part of his sound that was on about every track and a whole lot of it. So what is micro pitch? So micro pitch is basically Eventide's chorusing effect. And the thing I really like about it, and I think Eddie liked as well, is it plays really well with distorted amps. If you look at the most common chorusing sound that guitarists use, it tends to be the Boss CE1 type effect pedal. And people like Zakk Wylde still use that sound with distortion, and he gets his own thing. But what I find with the Eventide micro pitch is, again, it just plays really well when you're adding gain onto the sound. And I think Edward was attracted to this sound. As a matter of fact, he started using this in his live rig around the 5150 era. So up to this point, there were varying degrees of micro pitch on the Van Halen guitar sounds, but it was done probably in mixing on the board. We're going to look at how this evolved over the years, and the first place it's really noticeable is on the track Women in Love. Especially on the intro, you can really hear a lot of this effect being used to create that kind of harmonized sound. So before I play this riff, here is my guitar sound without the micro pitch. And here it is now with the micro pitch. So to get these micro pitch sounds today, I am using the Eventide H9 pedal. There's also a dedicated micro pitch pedal that they make that really nails this sound. But the one from the H9 to me sounds really good and it's pretty versatile, so that's what we're going with. So for this first riff on Women in Love, I have an expression pedal attached to this so I can dial in various amounts of the effect. So I have an expression pedal, it's set to about 14, and that's going to bring it in. It's going to be subtle, but it is going to be there. And here's what that sounds like. So there, you hear the micro pitch widens the sound a little bit, especially where Van Halen's a trio. Sometimes that micro pitch sound can really, like I said, widen the guitar sound, make it fill up a little bit more space. Now, I do hear some of it being used on the Women and Children First album, but it really becomes a staple of his sound starting on the Fair Warning album. It sounds like there is a healthy amount of this effect on nearly every song. So here's an example of what that would sound like. So on Diver Down, it seems like this effect is being used a little bit less, but by the time we get to 1984, it's back with a vengeance, and it's being used a pretty healthy amount on the tracks, and it just seemed like with each subsequent Van Halen album, this effect was used even more. So here's an example of how it was being used in 1984. So by the time we get to 5150 and OU812, you're hearing a lot more of this effect. So here's a couple of examples with more micro pitch. I find that the settings aren't really that different for his main sound. It's just some of that detune where you're putting, up to 10% on each side out, which just gives it that widening effect. And that's what this sounds like here. Those are some examples of Edward Van Halen using this micro pitch effect. As I said, especially as you move into the 90s, it's just all over the place on his sound. What I want to do is take a second and look at some alternatives if you don't have a pedal. So this is the universal audio plug-in version of the micro pitch function. This is the Eventide H949. Very cool plug-in. They're even nice enough to have a preset called Franken Guitar. So guess what time it is with that one. So you could just dial in as much or as little of this as you like, post, and it's really going to get you that Eddie Van Halen micro pitch vibe. So this is another plugin from Soundtoys called the Microshift. This one's very easy to get started with. Again, it sounds very similar to the Eventide type plugins, and you can mess around with it. I have a plugin here that I've designed for a lot of guitar stuff. It's not necessarily to sound like Van Halen. It's just an overall thing that I use for guitar, and a lot of times it's on the videos that we shoot. So either of these options work. There is a Eventide version of the H9 in a plugin format. I definitely don't like that one as much, but it is out there, and again, it sounds great in the pedal. That's all I've got today. Thank you to everyone that subscribes to us. We really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It really helps out the channel. In the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Thanks again.